The day my father threw my suitcase onto the driveway, his voice was sharp and cold. He called me a burden, an incompetent dreamer who would never stand on his own. I was 19, and in a single moment, the house I had known my whole life was no longer mine. I stood there staring at the gravel, the suitcase lying open, clothes spilling out like pieces of a life that didn't belong anywhere. The front door shut behind me, and I knew I had been cut off, not just from a roof and bed, but from the family I thought would always protect me. My name is Elliot Graves, and I grew up in a house where love was measured against success. My father, Martin, was a man who believed every child should be built like steel, unyielding, polished, flawless. My mother, Deborah, followed his lead, standing at his side with polite smiles that never reached her eyes. I was the middle child, always walking the thin space between my brother Sterling, who wore his achievements like medals, and my sister Clara, who never strayed from the straight road they had drawn for her. Sterling was the pride of the family. He studied law, spoke with the confidence of someone who had been praised his whole life, and my father introduced him to strangers as though he were a trophy. Clara was the obedient one, bright and disciplined, already carving a medical career before she could even drive a car. They were the examples held up at the dinner table, while I sat quiet, pushing food around my plate, wondering why the air always felt so heavy when eyes turned toward me. I didn't fit. I loved sketching designs, tinkering with scraps of wood, reading about ideas that had no place in my father's world of hard numbers and clear titles. Every time I shared a thought about what I wanted to build, Martin's expression tightened, Deborah looked away, and Sterling smirked. My father would remind me that dreams didn't pay bills, that I should follow the path already proven by my sibling. When I resisted, the arguments grew sharper. That night, when I came home with news that I had left a program he had chosen for me, his patience ended. There were no long discussions, no attempt at understanding. He told me I was finished in his house. His words were final, carved in stone. I was left standing on the driveway under a dim porch light, the night air pressing against me, while inside, the voices of my family continued as though nothing had happened. For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be completely alone. The betrayal didn't come like a sudden storm. It came in small moments that built up until they broke me completely. For as long as I could remember, I had tried to earn their approval. I studied late into the night. I worked harder than I ever admitted, and I swallowed the sting of their comparisons, hoping one day they would look at me with pride. Even when my father's words cut, I kept trying. Even when my mother's silence weighed heavier than criticism, I kept pushing forward. Deep down, I believed if I gave enough, I would finally belong. That belief shattered the night everything collapsed. We were at the dinner table, the whole family gathered. The food was untouched in front of me, my stomach in knots because I knew what was coming. My father leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, and spoke as if announcing a fact everyone already knew. He called me dead weight. The words were not whispered in anger but said clearly, almost casually, so that everyone around the table could hear and nod along. The room went still. My chest burned, but I kept my eyes down, waiting for someone to defend me. I looked toward my mother. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her gaze steady but empty, as if she had trained herself not to see me at all. She didn't speak. She didn't protest. She chose her silence, and in that silence, I understood where her loyalty truly rested. Sterling, sitting across from me, smiled with that familiar smirk, the one he had worn since we were children. He leaned forward and added his own insult, saying I was too soft to survive in the real world. His voice dripped with amusement, not cruelty, as if my failure was entertainment. He had no doubt he was stronger, smarter, and worth more in our father's eyes. Clara, still young but already shaped by their approval, repeated their words. She spoke like an echo, reminding me I lacked discipline, that I was wasting potential. Hearing it from her hurt in a different way. She had been the one I thought might still see me as a brother, but even she had chosen the side that was easier, safer. That dinner wasn't an argument. It wasn't loud. There was no shouting match, no chance to explain myself, no space to ask for understanding. It was a judgment, a sentence carried out with calm certainty. I wasn't treated like a son who had disappointed them, but like a stranger who had no right to stay at the table. My father's words were the final verdict, and my mother's silence was the seal. My siblings' voices only confirmed what had already been decided. When I was told to leave, it wasn't in a rush of anger, but with a coldness that made the air heavy. There was no sense of loss in their faces, no hesitation. My suitcase was handed over, as if removing a problem from the house. It felt less like a family breaking apart, and more like a quiet execution. They didn't raise their voices because they didn't need to. In their eyes, I was already gone. That night, the last bit of trust one had left in them slipped away. It wasn't just about being rejected. It was about realizing I had been chasing something that was never meant for me. The love I thought I could earn had never been offered in the first place. When the door closed behind me, I had no plan, no place to turn. I carried my suitcase like it was the only proof I still existed, wandering until my feet ached. That first night, I found an old truck parked behind a gas station. The windows were cracked, the seats torn, but it was dry, and I crawled inside with my bag against my chest. The smell of oil and dust filled the air, but it was better than sleeping on the ground. I stayed there night after night, watching the neon lights of the station flicker, while I wondered how long I could last like that. The days blurred together as I searched for work. I walked into stores, restaurants, anywhere with a sign in the window. Most people turned me away without a second look, but eventually, I started picking up small jobs. Some days I scrubbed floors in offices after hours, the chemical sting of cleaning supplies burning my hand. Other days I carried heavy furniture into apartments, my back sore and my arms bruised. At night, when I was lucky, I washed dishes in a diner, listening to the clang of plates and the sizzle of grease while my stomach growled. Money came in coins and small bills, never enough to feel safe. I kept every dollar folded carefully in my pocket, counting and recounting as though numbers alone could keep me alive. Meals were whatever I could find cheapest. Bread a day away from going stale, fruit with bruises, cans dented and shoved to the back of shelves. I ate standing up in alleys, chewing slowly to make scraps last longer, pretending I was full when I wasn't. The nights were the hardest. The truck grew colder, and no amount of layering could stop the chill from creeping into my bone. I lay awake staring at the roof above me, repeating my father's words until they carved themselves into my thoughts. "You'll never make it." I heard it in his voice every time I failed to fall asleep, every time hunger twisted my stomach, every time exhaustion threatened to break me. The words followed me like a shadow, louder than the sound of passing cars or the hum of the gas station light. There were moments when giving up seemed easier, when I wondered if maybe he had been right all along. But in the silence, anger started to grow beneath the doubt. Not the kind of anger that made me want to hurt them, but something deeper, a refusal to let their judgment define the rest of my life. I began to imagine what it would feel like to stand on my own one day, not to prove my worth to them, but to prove that their rejection had not destroyed me. Each long shift, each cheap meal, each sleepless night became fuel. I told myself that every small step forward, no matter how invisible, was another crack in the cage they had built for me. I didn't know how I would get out or where the road would lead, but the thought of rising above the words that haunted me was enough to keep me moving. I had nothing left to lose, and that, in its own way, gave me the smallest taste of freedom. I found the hardware store by accident. I had been walking past a row of small shops, looking for another help wanted sign, when I noticed a hand-painted note taped to the dusty glass door. It said part-time help needed. The store was quiet inside, filled with the smell of wood and old metal. Behind the counter stood an older woman with silver hair tied in a bun and glasses resting low on her nose. She looked at me closely when I asked about the job, and instead of brushing me off like so many others had, she nodded and told me to start the next morning. Her name was Mrs. Harriet Carlson. The work itself wasn't glamorous. I swept aisles, stacked nails and screws into bins, carried lumber to the trucks of contractors, and fixed squeaky hinges on display doors. But Harriet noticed everything. She saw how I never stopped until the job was done, even if it was simple. She saw how I stayed late without being asked, putting shelves in order or cleaning up spills. One evening, after closing, she poured us both a cup of tea and said, "You've got grit, Elliot. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." No one had spoken to me like that in months. Harriet started talking to me more as the days passed. She asked about where I came from, though I gave only pieces of the truth. She didn't push, just listened. She told me about her late husband, who had run the store before. She said business wasn't only about selling things, but about building trust, treating people with honesty, and finding ways to keep moving forward even when times were hard. Her words stuck with me because they weren't polished speeches, just lessons learned from living. One afternoon, she handed me a small stack of books. "You should read these," she said, sliding them across the counter. They helped me when I didn't know what to do next. The titles were worn, the pages underlined in places. They were about business, resilience, and people who had started with little but built something lasting. I read them late at night, sometimes by the dim light of the gas station when I couldn't sleep. The stories stirred something in me. They made me believe it was possible to create instead of just survive. Harriet noticed my interest and kept encouraging me. When I mentioned small ideas, like designing a better way to store tools or building affordable furniture, she didn't laugh. She asked questions. She told me to keep writing my thoughts down, no matter how unrealistic they seemed. "Everything starts as a sketch in the mind," she reminded me. Her faith in me, quiet and steady, felt like a light in the dark I had been stumbling through. Working in that store didn't give me wealth or comfort, but it gave me something I hadn't felt since I was a child: hope. For For the first time since being pushed out, I began to imagine that maybe I wasn't meant to follow someone else's path. Maybe I could build one of my own. The idea wasn't clear yet, but the seed had been planted, and it began to take root inside me. With the money I saved from working at the store, I signed up for night classes at the community college. The campus was small, the classrooms plain, but walking into them felt like stepping into another world. I sat at the back most nights, notebooks open, scribbling down every word. My focus turned toward sustainable construction and green energy, subjects that made sense to me in a way nothing else ever had. I studied how buildings could be designed to use less power, how materials could be reused, how homes could be built cheaper without being fragile. It wasn't just knowledge, it felt like possibility. The schedule was exhausting. I worked long shifts at the store during the day and then rushed across town to make it to class. By the time I walked back to my room, it was usually past midnight. I rented a single space above a laundromat, no bigger than a storage closet. The walls were thin, and the constant hum of the machines below shook the floor. My bed was nothing more than a mattress pushed into the corner, and my desk was a piece of plywood balanced on 2 crates. But it was mine, and in that room I spread out sketches, charts, and scraps of paper filled with ideas. Most nights I stayed awake long after I should have been asleep. My hands moved quickly over the pages, sketching small models, calculating numbers, erasing mistakes, then starting again. I told myself I was building something that would outlast the nights of hunger and the years of being dismissed. Still, the weight of it pressed on me. There were times when the numbers didn't add up, when I stared at my notes until my vision blurred, and I wondered if I was wasting time. The old doubts returned. I could hear my father's voice, sharp as ever, reminding me I would never succeed. Those words cut deepest when I was tired, when the room felt too small and the silence too loud. There were nights I broke down, sitting on the floor with my head in my hands, fighting the urge to walk away from it all. But Harriet's words never left me. On the hardest days, I stopped by the store to see her, and she always had something to say that pushed me forward. Sometimes it was simple. "You're further than you think, Elliot." Other times, she would tell me stories about her own struggles, how she almost lost the store more than once, but refused to quit. Hearing her speak made me believe I could keep going too. Little by little, the ideas in my notebook grew into something sharper. I began to see patterns where there had once been chaos. I felt tired most of the time, but under the exhaustion, there was a flicker of excitement. Each class, each page, each late night carried me closer to something I couldn't fully picture yet, but knew was waiting. I wasn't there, not even close, but I was moving. And for the first time, moving forward was enough. Years passed in a blur of long shifts, night classes, and endless notes scattered across my small desk. I failed more times than I could count. Some of my early designs collapsed before I could even test them. Others looked good on paper, but cost too much to be practical. I kept starting over, each mistake teaching me something new. Slowly, through all the frustration, the pieces began to fit together. What I wanted was clear: homes that were strong, affordable, and easy to build. Not just for people with money, but for anyone who needed a roof they could rely on. One evening, sitting over a half-finished sketch, I found the answer that had been hiding in plain sight. Instead of trying to copy traditional houses, I designed a modular system. Each section could be built separately, light enough to transport, but durable once locked together. It used recycled materials where possible and required far less energy to put together than standard construction. The best part was that it didn't need a large crew or heavy equipment. A few people could assemble it in days. For the first time, my idea didn't just make sense in theory. It was something real. I shared it with Harriet, my hands shaking as I laid the drawings across her counter. She studied them with more seriousness than anyone else ever had. When she finally looked up, her eyes softened. "Elliot, this could work," she said, and in that moment, I believed her more than I believed myself. The first chance to test my design came through Harriet's church. A family in her community had lost their home in a fire, and they needed something fast but affordable. Harriet mentioned my name, and before I knew it, I was standing in their yard with a team of volunteers, my designs in hand. It wasn't easy. I made mistakes, adjusted on the spot, and worked until my muscles gave out. But when we stepped back and looked at the finished structure, small, clean, and sturdy, I felt something I had never felt before. Pride that wasn't borrowed, pride that belonged only to me. Word spread slowly after that. A neighbor of that family asked for my help, then another. Each project brought new challenges, but also new lessons. I reinvested every dollar I earned back into improving the design. I tested different materials, made the sections easier to transport, and refined the assembly process. Before long, people outside the community were calling, curious about what I was building. One by one, the projects grew. I hired a few workers, people who believed in what I was doing and weren't afraid of the long hours. The small jobs turned into bigger ones. What had started as sketches on scraps of paper became a business. I didn't think of it as a company at first, but that's what it became. What everyone once mocked as a weakness, my dreaming, my stubborn ideas, had turned into the foundation of something solid. My failure in their eyes was the reason I had discovered a new way forward. And as the work continued to grow, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. The work grew slowly, like a fire that takes time before it spreads. I never rushed to show anyone what I was doing. I didn't throw numbers around or talk about how much money was coming in. I just focused on building, one project after another, each one better than the last. Word of mouth did the rest. Soon I had more requests than I could handle on my own, so I brought in a few workers. At first, it was just two men who had once been laid off from construction jobs, then a young woman who had studied architecture but wanted something hands-on. Together we worked long hours, often out in the open air with nothing but tools, determination, and my design. The team grew slowly, but what mattered most was that they trusted me. They saw I was willing to work beside them, to carry the same weight, to get my hands dirty. I never asked anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. That mattered more than titles or paychecks. They respected me not because I was the boss, but because I never forgot where I started. As the projects grew larger, I realized I needed support to take it further. Investors weren't easy to convince, but when they saw the finished homes, the numbers behind them, and the demand that kept climbing, some began to take interest. I walked into those meetings wearing the same plain clothes I wore at the job sites, nervous but steady. I didn't promise them wild profits. I told them about my vision, affordable housing that could change lives, and about the people who were already living in the homes we built. That honesty worked. Step by step, funding came in, and with it, more opportunities. By the time I turned 30, the company had grown beyond what I once thought possible. The value reached into the millions, though the number itself never mattered as much as what it represented. Each project completed was proof that I had turned rejection into something real. Each paycheck I handed out meant another family could support themselves. Each house built meant another family had a place to live. That was the kind of wealth I understood. Still, I never forgot the nights when I had nothing. I remembered the truck I used as a shelter, the sound of coins counted in my hand, the taste of stale bread. I remembered every word spoken at that dinner table, the way my father's voice cut, the way my mother sat silent, the way my siblings laughed. Those memories didn't fade with success. They stayed sharp, a reminder of what I had escaped and why I would never become like them. The more the company grew, the more determined I became to hold onto my humility. I didn't want power that crushed people. I didn't want money that blinded me. I wanted to prove that strength came from perseverance, not cruelty. The team I built knew that. They trusted that I would never forget the path that led me here. And they were right. Every cruel word I once carried had been reshaped into fuel. It pushed me forward, not toward revenge, but toward becoming the man my family never believed I could be. The morning it happened began like any other. I sat at my small desk, coffee cooling beside me, sorting through emails that rarely carried anything more than routine messages. Then I saw the subject line that made me pause. My hands shook before I even clicked it open. The words were short, direct, and impossible to believe. I had been selected by Forbes as one of the 25 under 35 innovators. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some mix-up or a scam, but the letterhead was real, the details clear, and the names of people I had admired for years were listed beside mine. My chest tightened as I read it again and again. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the shock broke into something I hadn't felt in years. Tears slid down my face before I even realized I was crying. Pride filled me, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that swells quietly until it feels too big to contain. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the past rushed over me. I saw the old truck behind the gas station, the bread I had stretched for days, the classes I dragged myself through half asleep. I remembered the nights when I broke down on the floor, sure I would never escape my father's word. And now, here was proof that every sacrifice, every failure, every step forward had meant something. I had gone from being cast out as worthless to being recognized on a national stage. The first person I wanted to share it with was Harriet. My hands shook again as I dialed her number. She answered with her usual calm voice, but as soon as I read her the email, her tone cracked. She didn't try to hide the sound of her crying. "Oh, Elliot," she whispered between tears. "I knew you'd make it. I knew it." Hearing her break down like that undid me all over again. She had been there from the very start, the one who gave me work when no one else would, the one who believed I had more inside me than failure. We spoke for a long time that morning, both of us laughing and crying in turns. She reminded me how far I had come, though I didn't need reminding. My own memories had already done that. but hearing her pride made it real in a way nothing else could. She wasn't just happy for me, she was proud as if I were her own son. That meant more than the award itself. After we hung up, I sat for a long while in silence, staring at the screen with the announcement glowing back at me. The boy who had been cast out, the young man who had once believed he would never matter, was now seen by the world in a different light. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly believe it. I hadn't just survived. I had made it. It didn't take long for the news to reach them. My name in Forbes traveled faster than I ever could, and soon enough, their silence broke after years of nothing. The first message came from my father. His words were smooth, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. He wrote that he always knew I had potential, as though the years of calling me incompetent had never happened. He spoke of pride, of family, of how it was only a matter of time before I proved myself. Reading it felt strange. There was no mention of the driveway, no sign he remembered the night he threw me out. His memory had been rewritten to keep himself comfortable. Not long after, my mother reached out. Her message was softer, filled with apologies wrapped in excuses. She said she wished things had been different, that she had been under pressure, that she had only stayed quiet because she didn't know what else to do. She asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive her. The words looked gentle, but I could feel the distance behind them. It wasn't regret for what she had done. It was regret that I had carried the weight alone. Then came Sterling. His tone was upbeat, almost too casual. He spoke about how proud he was, how he had always known I was different in a good way. Then, almost in the same breath, he suggested we might collaborate sometime, that my company could use someone with his connections. It was less about me and more about what he thought he could gain. Clara followed not long after, echoing him. She wanted to reconnect, to catch up, and she hinted that we could do great things together. Their words sounded rehearsed, practiced in the mirror before being sent. I read every line carefully, letting each message sink in, but I didn't feel what they wanted me to feel. There was no rush of warmth, no sudden pull back into their orbit. I felt only distance, and in that distance, a strange calm. I wasn't angry, not even bitter. I had been once. But now, the life I had built stood as proof that their rejection had shaped me more than their acceptance ever could. When I finally responded, I kept my words polite. I thanked them for reaching out, but I didn't open the door wider than that. I owed them nothing. Blood alone doesn't hold weight without loyalty, and they had shown me long ago where their loyalty truly lay. I listened, I acknowledged, but I didn't invite them back into the place they had abandoned. For years, I had carried their voices in my head, voices that told me I would never make it. Now they reached for me only because the world had finally said otherwise. That truth was enough. I didn't need their approval. I never had. The first time I saw them again was at a family gathering nearly 10 years after I had been thrown out. I didn't go to make a scene. I didn't go to prove anything. I went because I wanted to see them with my own eyes, to know for myself that the past no longer had control over me. I walked into the house quietly, no announcements, no grand entrance. My clothes were simple, my steps steady. The room shifted the moment I entered. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years glanced at me, some with surprise, others with curiosity. Whispers traveled quickly, and though no one said it directly, I could hear my name linked with Forbes. I didn't need to ask what they were saying. Their eyes told me enough. My father stood near the center of the room, drink in hand, his face composed but stiff. He greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile used to cover unease. For once, he couldn't dismiss me. My mother came next. She touched my arm lightly, her voice warm but trembling. She spoke as if nothing had ever gone wrong, as though a decade had not been filled with silence. My siblings followed soon after, their words rehearsed, cheerful on the surface. Sterling spoke about business opportunities, Clara about how proud she was. I listened, nodded politely, and answered without anger. But I didn't let their words sink in. They no longer carried weight. The rest of the evening unfolded around me. Cousins asked questions with wide eyes, aunts and uncles exchanged glances, and I could feel the shift in the air. The boy they once called a failure was standing among them, not with arrogance but with quiet certainty. I didn't raise my voice, didn't share numbers or titles. I simply stood there, calm and steady, proof of what they had once cast aside. The real revenge wasn't in pointing fingers or reminding them of their cruelty. It was in being there, whole and unbroken, with a life stronger than anything they had imagined for. My success didn't need to be shouted. It spoke on its own. And in that silence, my father's composure cracked. I saw it in the way he tightened his grip on his glass, in the stiffness of his jaw. For once, he had no words to cut me down. I didn't stay long. I left before the night grew heavy with forced conversations and empty attempts at closeness. Stepping out into the cool air, I felt lighter, as if I had closed a chapter that had been left open for too long. I didn't go home afterward. I drove to Harriet's house instead. She welcomed me inside, her face lighting up the way it always had. Sitting across from her, I felt at peace. They called me incompetent, I thought as I looked at her. And now strangers know my name for the very reason my family abandoned me. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply surviving and thriving.